Ethan Carter, a bright and ambitious 22-year-old biology student, had been the pride of his family and a rising star in his field. His untimely death sent shockwaves through his community. He was found lifeless in his university lab late one evening, surrounded by scattered notes and equipment. The official report stated natural causes, but those closest to Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Ethan's parents, Sarah and James Carter, were devastated. They couldn't accept that their healthy, athletic son could pass away so suddenly without any warning signs. His younger sister, Lily, 16, was especially distraught. Ethan was always careful, she whispered tearfully to her parents one evening. He wouldn't just collapse. As weeks passed, Ethan's death left more questions than answers. His professor, Dr. Alan Ross, a dedicated researcher with a reputation for thoroughness, also found it hard to believe. Ethan had been working on a groundbreaking project related to DNA analysis, something that could revolutionize their field. He was too close to something big, Dr. Ross murmured during a quiet meeting with Sarah and James. There's something we're missing. Dr. Ross proposed an idea that would sound strange to most, placing a camera inside Ethan's coffin. It wasn't a lack of respect, but a scientific approach to uncover what might have happened. It's unconventional, he admitted. But if Ethan's body is reacting to something external, it might provide the answers we're looking for. The Carters were hesitant, torn between their grief and the need for closure. After much deliberation, they agreed. The camera was installed discreetly inside the coffin before Ethan's burial. It was a small, high-resolution device that could record for weeks. Dr. Ross assured the Carters that the footage would only be accessed if something unusual occurred. As Ethan was laid to rest, Sarah held Lily tightly, both of them silently praying for peace. But deep down, they hoped for answers. Days turned into a week, and the Carters tried to adjust to life without Ethan. The house felt eerily quiet without his laughter, and the unfinished projects in his room were a constant reminder of his absence. Lily often sat in Ethan's room, flipping through his notebook, searching for something, anything that might explain what had happened. Dr. Ross, on the other hand, had been meticulously monitoring the camera footage. At first, everything seemed normal. The camera captured the stillness of the coffin's interior, the satin lining, Ethan's motionless figure, and the faint hum of the recording device. There was nothing unusual. But on the seventh day, something strange happened. Dr. Ross noticed subtle movements on the footage. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light or perhaps interference from the equipment. The shift was so slight, like the faintest ripple in the fabric near Ethan's hands. He rewound the footage multiple times, studying every second. It wasn't enough to draw conclusions, but it was enough to raise questions. He decided to review the footage frame by frame. As he zoomed in, he noticed something more peculiar. Faint flashes of light, almost like tiny sparks, appeared near Ethan's chest. The flashes didn't follow any pattern and disappeared as quickly as they came. Dr. Ross was perplexed. Could this be an artifact of the camera, or was there something else at play? He knew he needed a second opinion. He called his colleague Dr. Claire Bennett, a physicist who specialized in electromagnetic phenomena. I need you to look at something, he told her over the phone, trying to keep his voice steady. It's unusual. That evening, Dr. Bennett arrived at Dr. Ross's office. Together, they analyzed the footage. As they watched, the flashes reappeared, faint but undeniable. Dr. Bennett leaned closer to the monitor, her brow furrowed. This isn't interference, she said confidently. There's an energy source, but it's not electrical. It's biological. Dr. Ross froze. Biological? Are you saying this is coming from Ethan? Dr. Bennett nodded slowly, her eyes wide with disbelief. Whatever's causing this, it's connected to him. The revelation left both scientists speechless. If Ethan's body was emitting energy even after death, it could mean one of two things. Either the reports about his death were inaccurate, or he had been exposed to something extraordinary. Dr. Ross decided not to inform the Carters yet. He needed more evidence before alarming them. However, he couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in his chest. Something about Ethan's death was far from ordinary. Dr. Ross and Dr. Bennett spent the next few days analyzing the footage and conducting additional tests. they decided to visit the cemetery where Ethan's coffin had been buried. Dr. Ross hoped that being near the source might provide answers, or at least confirm that the phenomena were real. With special permission, they installed an external monitoring device near Ethan's grave. This device could detect electromagnetic fields, thermal changes, and even subtle vibrations in the earth. The equipment was left running overnight and the data was sent directly to Dr. Ross's lab. The following morning, the results were both startling and puzzling. The electromagnetic readings spiked at random intervals, concentrated directly above Ethan's grave. Even stranger, the thermal sensors picked up brief flashes of heat from within the ground, an anomaly considering the cold winter conditions. Dr. Bennett reviewed the data alongside Dr. Ross. "This doesn't make sense," she muttered. "It's like something is trying to generate energy from inside the coffin." Dr. Ross nodded, his expression grave. "But that's impossible. The body was certified lifeless unless—" Dr. Bennett hesitated, reluctant to finish her thought. "Unless what?" Dr. Ross pressed, his patience thinning under the weight of unanswered questions. "Unless Ethan wasn't dead when he was buried," she said quietly. The words hung heavy in the room, sending a chill down Dr. Ross's spine. He shook his head. "That's absurd. The medical examiner confirmed it." Dr. Bennett crossed her arms. "Then how do you explain the energy, the heat? Bodies don't just emit electromagnetic pulses after death, Ross. Either something extraordinary happened to him, or there's been a colossal mistake." Reluctantly, Dr. Ross decided to revisit the hospital where Ethan's death had been declared. He sought out Dr. Miller, the pathologist who had signed Ethan's death certificate. When confronted with the data, Dr. Miller appeared uneasy. I don't know what to tell you," Dr. Miller stammered. "Ethan's death was sudden, cardiac arrest. We didn't see any irregularities during the post-mortem." "But did you perform a full autopsy?" Dr. Ross asked, his tone sharp. Dr. Miller hesitated, his eyes darting away. "There wasn't time. The family was grieving. It seemed straightforward." Dr. Ross's frustration boiled over. "A young, healthy man dies suddenly, and you don't think to dig deeper?" Dr. Miller's face flushed. "Look, I didn't make the call alone. The hospital administration—" Dr. Ross cut him off. "I need access to Ethan's medical records. Now." Dr. Miller reluctantly handed over the files. Back at the lab, Dr. Ross and Dr. Bennett pored over the documents. What they found sent shockwaves through them both. Ethan had been part of a clinical trial just weeks before his death. The trial involved an experimental drug designed to enhance cellular regeneration. Though the trial had been labeled safe, the records showed that Ethan had experienced side effects, abnormal heart rhythms, unexplained fevers, and elevated energy levels. Dr. Bennett leaned back in her chair, her face pale. "Ross, this drug, it could explain everything. If it altered Ethan's cellular structure." Dr. Ross finished her thought. "Then his body might still be generating energy even after death." They exchanged a look of disbelief. The mystery surrounding Ethan's death had just taken a shocking turn, and the implications were far more profound than they had imagined. The revelation about the clinical trial opened a floodgate of questions. Dr. Ross and Dr. Bennett delved deeper into the experimental drug that Ethan had taken. They discovered it was part of a top-secret project developed by a private pharmaceutical company called Nexagen Biotech. The drug, codenamed Neopulse, was intended to revolutionize medicine by accelerating cellular healing and regeneration. However, the trial records were incomplete. Key information, including the specific effects of the drug on trial participants, was missing. Suspicious of a cover-up, Dr. Ross contacted an old acquaintance, Lisa Carter, a journalist with a reputation for exposing corporate misconduct. Lisa agreed to help, and within a day she uncovered damning details. Several participants in the Neopulse trial had reported alarming side effects: sudden bursts of energy, unexplained heat emanating from their bodies, and in one case, a participant who briefly regained consciousness after being declared clinically dead. Nexagen had silenced these reports, citing confidentiality agreements. "This is bigger than we thought," Lisa said, sliding a folder across Dr. Ross's desk. "Nexagen knew their drug had dangerous side effects, but they continued the trial anyway. Ethan wasn't the only victim. Dr. Bennett scanned the files, her face pale. If this drug altered cellular activity to such a degree, it might explain the electromagnetic pulses and heat we've been detecting. Dr. Ross's mind raced. And if Ethan's body is still emitting energy, it could mean his cellular processes haven't fully shut down. Dr. Bennett hesitated. You're suggesting he's still, alive? On some level? I don't know, Dr. Ross admitted. But we need to find out. And we need Nexogen to answer for this. The trio decided to confront Nexogen. Lisa arranged a meeting with one of the company's former scientists, Dr. Alan Greer, who had worked on the Neo-Pulse project but resigned after raising ethical concerns. Dr. Greer was visibly nervous when he met them in a secluded cafe. I shouldn't be talking to you, Dr. Greer said, glancing over his shoulder. Nexogen doesn't take kindly to whistleblowers. We're not here to cause trouble, Dr. Ross assured him. We just need the truth. Dr. Greer sighed and leaned in. Neo-Pulse was rushed through development. The company wanted to be the first to market a drug that could regenerate damaged cells. But we didn't fully understand the long-term effects. The drug didn't just speed up cellular repair, it rewired the body's energy systems. In some cases, it triggered hyperactivity in cells, producing heat and electromagnetic emissions. That's why the trial participants experienced those strange symptoms. And Ethan? Dr. Bennett asked. What about him? Dr. Greer hesitated. If he was on Neo-Pulse, his body might still be in a state of cellular hyperactivity. It's not life as we know it, but it's not death either. It's something in between. Lisa frowned. Why wasn't this reported? Why wasn't the trial stopped? Dr. Greer shook his head. Because money. Nexogen saw a gold mine and didn't care about the risks. They buried the side effects, silenced the participants, and pushed forward. Dr. Ross clenched his fists. Ethan's family deserves the truth. They need to know what happened to him. Dr. Greer nodded grimly. If you're serious about exposing Nexogen, you'll need more than my word. Their lab records, internal emails, test data, that's where the proof is. But good luck getting it. Nexogen protects its secrets like their lives depend on it. Dr. Bennett looked at Dr. Ross. We've come this far. We can't stop now. Dr. Ross nodded. We'll get the evidence. Whatever it takes. The truth about Ethan's death was within reach, but uncovering it would require them to face the powerful corporation responsible and the dangerous consequences of their actions. Armed with Dr. Greer's warning and the determination to find the truth, Dr. Ross, Dr. Bennett, and Lisa Carter began planning their next move. Lisa suggested accessing Nexogen's secure facility, where they believed the critical documents and data related to the Neo-Pulse trial were stored. It won't be easy, Lisa warned, spreading a blueprint of the Nexogen headquarters on the table. This place has state-of-the-art security, cameras, ID scanners, and guards patrolling 24/7. Dr. Ross frowned, studying the blueprint. But they won't expect scientists and a journalist. We just need a distraction to get in and access their mainframe. Lisa smirked. Leave the distraction to me. The plan was set. The next evening, they approached the sprawling Nexogen complex. Lisa posed as a concerned citizen with questions about a recent press release, demanding to speak to a company representative. Her heated exchange at the reception desk was loud enough to draw attention, pulling security away from their posts. Meanwhile, Dr. Ross and Dr. Bennett slipped through the side entrance using a forged employee access card Dr. Greer had provided. The fluorescent-lit hallways were eerily silent as they navigated their way to the lab archives. Dr. Bennett carried a small hacking device, a tool she had borrowed from a tech-savvy friend, to bypass the secure access panels. Inside the archives, rows of cabinets and computer terminals lined the walls. Dr. Bennett immediately plugged the hacking device into a terminal, unlocking access to Nexogen's internal server. Dr. Ross scoured the cabinets for physical records while Dr. Bennett downloaded digital files. What exactly are we looking for? Dr. Bennett whispered, her eyes scanning a screen full of medical data. Anything that mentions Ethan's name, his trial ID, or the Neo-Pulse project, Dr. Ross replied, flipping through folders. Minutes felt like hours as the pair worked in tense silence. Suddenly, Dr. Bennett's screen flashed with a file labeled Trial Participants Neopulse, Confidential. She opened it and her breath caught. "Ethan's name is here," she whispered, pointing at the list. "And look, notes about side effects." Dr. Ross leaned over her shoulder. The notes confirmed their worst fears. Several trial participants had exhibited abnormal cellular and metabolic activity post-mortem. The files detailed attempts to suppress the information and keep the deaths classified as unrelated to the drug. "This is it," Dr. Ross said, snapping photos of the screen with his phone. "This is the proof we need." Dr. Bennett inserted a flash drive into the terminal, copying the entire file. But just as the download neared completion, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway. Dr. Ross and Dr. Bennett froze. "Someone's coming," Dr. Bennett hissed, pulling the flash drive from the terminal. She and Dr. Ross scrambled to hide behind a row of cabinets as the door opened. A guard entered, his flashlight sweeping the room. "Hello? Is someone in here?" Dr. Ross held his breath, clutching the drive tightly. The guard's footsteps grew louder as he moved closer to their hiding spot. Suddenly, an alarm blared from the building's entrance. "That must be Lisa," Dr. Bennett whispered, relief washing over her. The guard cursed under his breath, turning and rushing out. Dr. Ross and Dr. Bennett seized the opportunity to slip out of the archives, their hearts pounding as they retraced their steps back to the exit. They reunited with Lisa outside the complex, her expression triumphant despite the chaos she had caused. "Did you get it?" she asked. Dr. Ross held up the flash drive. "We got it, everything we need to expose them." Lisa grinned. "Good, let's make them pay." With the evidence in hand, they had a clear path to the truth, but revealing it would mean going public and facing the full wrath of Nexagen. The following day, the trio gathered in Lisa's small apartment, which doubled as her workspace. The room was filled with stacks of newspapers, photographs pinned to the walls, and a laptop glowing in the dim light. The flash drive containing the evidence rested on the table, the key to unraveling Nexagen's secrets. Lisa leaned forward, her hands on the laptop's keyboard. "Once we release this, there's no turning back. Nexagen will do everything in their power to discredit us." Dr. Ross nodded, his jaw set. "Ethan deserves justice, and so do the others who suffered because of this trial." Dr. Bennett added, "This isn't just about Ethan. If they're willing to cover up deaths, what else are they hiding? We can't let this go on." Lisa began drafting an expose for her publication, titled "The Dark Side of Innovation, Nexagen's Deadly Secret." The article outlined the details of the Neopulse trial, highlighting the unusual deaths of participants, including Ethan. It included screenshots of the confidential documents Dr. Greer's testimony and the medical inconsistencies Dr. Bennett had uncovered. "We need to release this strategically," Lisa said. "First, we publish the article online. Then we forward the evidence to trusted contacts, lawyers, investigative reporters, and medical oversight committees." Dr. Ross hesitated. "Do we contact the families of the other victims?" Lisa glanced at him. "Not yet. If we get them involved before this goes public, Nexagen might pressure them to stay quiet." The room fell silent as Lisa pressed the final key, uploading the article to the website of her independent news outlet. The headline appeared on the screen, bold and impossible to ignore. Within minutes, the story began to spread, shared on social media, and picked up by other news platforms. Lisa's phone buzzed incessantly with calls and emails. Journalists wanted interviews, advocacy groups offered support, and whistleblowers from other companies reached out, inspired by the bold exposé. But not everyone was pleased. Dr. Ross's phone rang, and when he answered, a deep voice said, "You don't know what you've done." "Who is this?" Dr. Ross demanded. "You've made a grave mistake," the voice continued. "Walk away now, or you'll regret it." The call ended abruptly, leaving Dr. Ross shaken. He turned to the others. "They're already trying to intimidate us." Lisa shrugged. "Let them try. They can't silence the truth now." The article's publication triggered a wave of reactions. Within hours, it was trending on social media with hashtags like #JusticeForEthan and #StopNexagen gaining traction. Public outrage grew as people demanded answers from the pharmaceutical giant. Nexigen issued a public statement denying the allegations and accusing Lisa's publication of spreading false information. But their response only fueled the public's suspicion. Anonymous employees and former trial participants began coming forward corroborating the claims. Among them was a woman named Carla, whose brother had also died after participating in the Neo-Pulse trial. She contacted Lisa, offering to share her story. "They told me it was a freak accident," Carla said in a recorded interview, "but I always knew something wasn't right. Thank you for giving us a voice." The movement gained momentum, with protests outside Nexigen's headquarters and demands for government investigations. Dr. Bennett reached out to regulatory agencies, presenting the evidence to medical boards and ethical oversight committees. Despite the public support, the team knew the battle wasn't over. Nexigen's resources were vast, and their willingness to cover up the truth made them dangerous. But as Lisa looked at the growing list of supporters and allies, she felt a flicker of hope. "We've started something they can't stop," she said. "Now we need to make sure it leads to real change." Weeks turned into months, and the investigation into Nexigen became one of the most followed stories in the country. Government officials launched formal inquiries, medical oversight boards conducted audits, and Nexigen's executives were subpoenaed for questioning. The tide was turning, but the fight was far from over. Dr. Ross and Dr. Bennett continued to play active roles in the investigation. They testified before a panel of lawmakers, presenting the irrefutable evidence they had gathered. Lisa, too, was at the forefront, tirelessly publishing follow-up articles and amplifying the voices of victims' families. The public outrage reached a peak when a leaked internal memo from Nexigen revealed that executives had known about the risks associated with Neo-Pulse, but chose to move forward with the trials to avoid financial losses. The memo included chilling statements like, "Adverse effects are manageable. Cost of doing business." This revelation sparked widespread protests, with demonstrators gathering outside Nexigen facilities and demanding accountability. News outlets worldwide picked up the story, turning it into a global conversation about ethics in the pharmaceutical industry. Nexigen's executives were eventually brought to trial. The courtroom was packed with journalists, families of victims, and activists. Dr. Greer, who had initially been reluctant to speak out, delivered a powerful testimony exposing the unethical practices she had witnessed during her time at Nexigen. "I joined this company to save lives," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "But I stayed silent as they turned a blind eye to suffering. No more." Dr. Bennett presented medical records showing the blatant manipulation of data to conceal Neo-Pulse's deadly side effects. Dr. Ross spoke about the discrepancies in Ethan's autopsy and the pressure he had felt to stay silent. Ethan's story became the heart of the trial. Carla, the woman who had lost her brother, gave an emotional statement. "These were people, not numbers," she said, holding up a photo of her brother. "They trusted Nexigen, and Nexigen betrayed them." The trial ended with a historic verdict. Nexigen's CEO and several top executives were found guilty of gross negligence and conspiracy to conceal evidence. They were sentenced to prison, and the company was ordered to pay millions in restitution to the victims' families. For Dr. Ross, the verdict brought a sense of closure, but not an end to his grief. He visited Ethan's grave often, bringing flowers and sitting in silence as he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. One evening he found a note tucked near the headstone. It was from Carla, thanking him for his courage. "Your fight gave my brother justice," it read. "Ethan would be proud." Lisa's exposé earned national recognition, and her work became a catalyst for change in the pharmaceutical industry. Whistleblower protections were strengthened and new regulations were introduced to ensure transparency and accountability in clinical trials. Dr. Bennett returned to her practice but remained an advocate for ethical medical research. She started a foundation in Ethan's name, dedicated to educating the public about the importance of ethical standards in medicine. On the anniversary of Ethan's death, Dr. Ross stood at his son's grave with a small bouquet of lilies, Ethan's favorite flower. The wind carried the scent of fresh grass, and the setting sun bathed the cemetery in a warm golden light. "I miss you every day, son," he whispered, his voice heavy with emotion, "but I promise your story will save lives." As he turned to leave, a young boy ran past, laughing as he chased a kite. Dr. Ross watched him for a moment, a bittersweet smile on his face. Ethan's memory would always be with him. But now he could also see the hope of a better future, one where mistakes like this would never happen again. The fight had been long and painful, but it had been worth it. Ethan's story had sparked change, and his legacy would live on in the lives of countless others.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.